So Final Fantasy XIV is a loneliness problem, and I think that Square has been sitting on the solution to fix it for years. When I played through Eureka early last year, it really shined a spotlight on how barren the rest of the game feels to me. Other than hanging around the 3 starter towns, and let's be honest, mainly Limsa, you're never really going to see more than a handful of people despite there being millions of players. Compare that to Eureka and Boja. You're surrounded by players constantly and shout chats bustling with people asking to group up. It made me think, what if the whole game felt like this? And so I came up with a few ways that I think Square can make the game feel a little more alive. So I'm starting with what I think is the most important part of this idea since everything else relies on it, and that's rewards. Like it or hate it, the average Final Fantasy XIV player is reward driven. We like unlocking things and we like having something to show for our efforts, so why not double down on that? Boja and Eureka give you rewards for pretty much everything that you do, sometimes multiple at the same time. Let's look at Boja specifically since it does it a little bit better. You have the fragments for skills, notes for lore, block boxes for random loot, the medal system, and honor buffs. Zones in FF14 already work like this sort of, but for the most part, the rewards aren't really there. If you go out to kill random enemies, you get a bunch of crafting mats that you don't really care about. If you do fates, you get some experience, a little bit of gil, and in newer content, gemstones, which are a good first step, but I really want to revamp this. Did you know that fates used to be the preferred way of leveling back in 2.0? While I don't think that they should be the absolute best way to level, having them be more comparable to roulettes would help a lot here. What I'd like to see are more meaningful rewards overall. You can keep the old crafting ingredients, but what if the monsters had a chance to drop loot boxes? You could even have a shared loot table for the entire expansion if you wanted, but each zone should have a few unique items that you can't get anywhere else. That way, people aren't just picking the most optimal zone for farming. Likewise, let's really improve the gemstone system. This is a step in the right direction, but I want the rewards to be more varied and unique. Right now, they're mostly good for a few niche housing items, zone theme orchestrions, and the raid food crafting mats. What if every zone had an emote or even exclusive music that you couldn't hear anywhere else? I'd also say that we should completely expand the original shared fate system to be a kind of progression that levels up for anything that you do in the zone as a whole. This means hunts would matter more than just tome farming, maybe even the local tribal quests as well. We could even have regular monster kills triggering fate spawns so that players aren't forced to wait for timers to do the fates that they want. This is a great part of the exploration zone since it forces players to explore and figure out which monsters spawn which encounters, which kinda leads me to my next change. Critical encounters. Let's bring Boja's critical encounters into the open world too. These were a great upgrade over Eureka's notorious monsters. If you haven't experienced these kind of function like mini trials that happen in the overworld. You can even use the same system as Boja where you can warp right into it once it's spawned. Just lock it behind Aethercurrent progression so that you can't do these before the main story is over in the zone. The problem with many of the current zone encounters is that the fights are rarely interesting. Most fates are boring and really simple. Hunt enemies maybe have 1 or 2 notable mechanics at the most. Meanwhile in Boja, the critical encounters feel more akin to shorter trials with many mechanics to learn. Honestly, even today, if you hop into a Boja critical encounter, you'll see people dying to the mechanics. They're not a walk in the park. Having a system with a queue and timer would make it easy and fair for anyone to try these. This gets around the issue that Eureka and S-Rank hunt marks have, where you have to worry about getting somewhere in time before it's pulled, or even risking early pullers ruining things for others. These fights should not only be fun, but also serve as a consistent way to get among everything else, weekly tomes. I truly believe that the game needs more options for tome farming besides dungeon grinds and roulette spam. Hunt trains are cool, but they're not very approachable for new players. With this kind of system built into the game, new players wouldn't have to worry about link shells or discords that they know nothing about to experience this critical part of progression, or I guess in the case of Endwalker, relic farming. If we had a meaningful way to farm tomes in the overworld, that alone would make a massive difference in how lively the world would feel. This would also be super satisfying if you ask me, since you're progressing multiple things at the same time, which is always fun for things like relic grinds where you can progress multiple relics at once. My next idea only expands on this, and that's large-scale instances. Just like Boja, I'd love for every zone to have a large-scale instance like Castrum in the Dalriada. These are some of my favorite pieces of content, and they often cause large amounts of people to show up just to get the rewards that are exclusive to it. This would be a way to visually add some variety to the zones as well, with both new areas exclusive to these instances as well as enemies tied to the lore of the region. They wouldn't even have to be villains. Maybe these could work with a bit more generous of a timer compared to Boja, while also giving a ton of tomes to encourage people to continue doing them. If anything, you could even give each instance a daily bonus to encourage people to do all of them instead of sticking to one zone. Maybe doing these large instances could be a way to get materials that crafters benefit from. Or even imagine something like doing the cache from a zone to trigger special gathering nodes that last for 30 minutes. These nodes could cause the community to work together to sustain the market of materials available to craft and sell. I really love when games force players to work together across professions. It kind of creates a really beautiful engine where everyone has a part to play, and that establishes a really big sense of belonging to a greater shared goal and community. That's what MMOs are all about, if you ask me. While Final Fantasy XIV prides itself on the self-sufficiency of the player, if a big theme of dawntrail is returning to that MMO feel and spirit, this will be a great way to do that. And that leads into how we can reward the crafters and gatherers for taking part in the open world as well. Just like the idea of spawning rare nodes because of combat, what if the reverse was true as well? Imagine if gatherers had to mine a special area enough to trigger a special encounter. Something like disturbing the earth or some forest guardian that wants to protect the local resources. This fight could also have exclusive loot or maybe even function as a duel. Just maybe compared to the original duel system in Boja, let's figure out a way to make the duels instance-based, that way it isn't a pain to try them like it is normally in Boja. Eureka had a similar system where a special notorious monster encounter actually granted players the ability to attempt the Baldesian Arsenal, the capstone 56-player raid of Eureka. For some, this could encourage cross-class gameplay. For others, maybe you work together with the Gather and promise to split rewards if they help you to spawn the encounter. Hey, for a crazier idea, maybe this special gathering area has enemies that will always aggro onto gatherers, requiring them to have escorts defending them. This might be a little extreme, but it's fun to think about. I just really like the idea of encouraging people to work together and form parties. All of these things could be broadcasted so players know when stuff is going on in the zone. Maybe you even have a visual representation like a volcano erupting in the distance, or water overflowing somewhere. Just little details that make the zones feel more dynamic and alive. And for my last point, let's go in a little bit of a different direction. While these would be great ways to bring life into the zones, why stop there? Like I mentioned at the start, most of the major towns are kinda dead. This is something that I find pretty whack, especially if you're catching up on the MSQ today. You get to the super hype big city of Ishgard and it's just empty. It's the same for all the other expansions, and honestly, once Dawntrail drops, Charlene will be the exact same way. And now I know that events are usually kept in the starting towns so that new players can access them. I think it will be cool to have some that are duplicated in the other towns. We could even maybe have some exclusive events just for the tons of people that are caught up on the MSQ. I saw someone mentioning on Twitter how Starlight is actually an Ishgardian holiday. So it would make sense to see this being celebrated there too, more than any other town. And just to get a little spicy, what if we actually put critical encounters in towns too? Obviously these would have to make sense narratively, but it could be a cool way to bring some life to old places. I love seeing Kugane packed at night. There are definitely areas that are mostly unused in every town that could work as an arena. You could even make an arena slightly away from the rest of the town for combat stuff. In any case, I hope you enjoyed my random ideas, and if you're looking for stuff to do, check out my video next on the 10 things you could be doing to have fun before Dawntrail right now. Take it easy.